I am not a fan of the MCU. I used to be when I was younger, but the older I got, the more I gravitated towards other movies. Lately, to be honest, I just don't care what's going on in the Marvel Universe. It's just not that interesting to me. I haven't seen any of the shows, and I've only seen around 5 of the 11 movies they've released post-Endgame. So there's still some mild interest, I guess. What I'm trying to say is that I am not a Marvel super fan. They have heroes I think are cool, and they have movies that I like. But overall, I don't really give a shit about what's going on in the greater story of the MCU. But going into Deadpool and Wolverine, I was actually excited. And I gotta say, my expectations were met. Deadpool and Wolverine is a really fun blockbuster. It's not perfect, and I'll get into that, but overall, it's probably the most enjoyable Marvel movie I've seen since Infinity War. Either this or Guardians of the Galaxy 3. Anyways, in terms of comedy, this personally delivered. If you are not a fan of the usual Deadpool style of comedy, then you'll probably not enjoy this movie, and there are points where it gets to be a bit much, but there were more times where I was laughing or chuckling instead of me not. There were a lot of funny one-liners and references. The Chris Evans Human Torch character was a really funny addition. It was super unexpected, so seeing him was very surprising. There were actually a lot of good fourth wall breaks too. Usually I'm not a huge fan of fourth wall breaking humor because it's used in a lot of shitty comedies and really lazy ways, but in the Deadpool movies it really works for me. This movie in particular had some pretty decent ones that got some chuckles out of me. I'll say fairly consistently I was having a fun time watching the movie, and most of the jokes landed. Not all of the jokes made me lose my shit, but at the very least, a lot of them were still funny. Not every joke in a comedy has to be laugh out loud quality. This movie is easily the best when it's just trying to make you laugh. When there's an exposition scene or a confrontation with the villain, it's honestly just not as good as when the movie's just trying to be funny. Speaking of the villain, she was, in my opinion, working against the movie's favor. Like, she was okay, there's no fault on the actress or anything. She was threatening at times, but nothing about her was all that interesting or memorable besides how she sticks her fingers into people's faces or whatever. Overall, she felt pretty standard and generic, which is a common problem in the MCU. She's definitely no Thanos or high evolutionary in terms of how good of a villain she is. Her scenes kind of felt like annoying pit stops for the movie. Like, we need to have these scenes with her for the plot, but she's just so boring that we just want to go back to seeing Deadpool and Wolverine fuck around. It also doesn't help that she really overstays her welcome coming into the third act, and what she does during that time is really fucking boring. A lot of times during her scenes, I would just zone out because they really were not that entertaining. Now, the scenes focusing on Deadpool and Wolverine are entertaining, and it's what makes the movie so worth seeing. If Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman had bad chemistry on screen, the movie would be an actual train wreck. But they play off each other so well that even if Deadpool says something that isn't really that funny on paper, Wolverine's inclusion somehow adds to the humor. In terms of the goals that each character has, it's really nothing too special. Deadpool wants to save his universe, and Wolverine also wants to fix his own universe. It's pretty simple, but it's that simplicity that works in the movie's favor. This isn't a movie you watch focusing on the plot. It's more about the journey and the humor between Wolverine and Deadpool, which is kind of why the third act is the worst part of the movie. In the third act, like I said, there's more focus on the villain as well as the plot, but it goes on for way too long. The biggest problem with this movie is honestly the third act. It gets very close to becoming a slog. Third acts are a problem in all 3 Deadpool movies, but this one is especially annoying because of how plot-focused it gets. The real focus is the journey the 2 characters go on, and through this, the jokes just kind of naturally come into place. It's on this journey that we get reintroduced to Blade, X-23, and Elektra. Didn't really give a shit about Elektra, but seeing Wesley Snipes back as Blade was really cool. And Channing Tatum as Gambit was a really fun addition. I kinda wish this group got more to do because besides helping Deadpool and Wolverine reach the villain, I feel like there could have been a more fun dynamic placed on this group. If more development was placed on them, I wouldn't really have any complaints, and it's not a huge deal that they don't do a whole lot, but I can't help but think of some missed potential. A huge factor of the plot is the inclusion of the TVA. Now, before this, I had no idea who these people were. Apparently, they're from Loki. They did their job setting up the plot, and they didn't get in the way of Deadpool and Wolverine's dynamic. I enjoyed Mr. Paradox from the TVA way more than the actual villain for the movie. Probably because he had an actual personality to go with his character. He wasn't just some generic antagonist. He was actually fun to watch. What was kind of weird about this movie was how little screen time Deadpool's friends from the first two movies got. I'm happy Peter got more time in the movie, but I was really disappointed in the lack of Colossus. Colossus was my favorite side character from Deadpool 2, but here he literally doesn't even say anything. I understand that there is only so much you can fit into a 2-hour movie, but it's still weird that a pretty important character like Colossus didn't really have anything to do. Deadpool's friends are only really there to help motivate the plot. Overall, I'd say the characters are fine. This is a comedy first, so most of the characters' purposes are for jokes. This isn't really a movie where you care about the goals of the characters that much because it's really not supposed to be that deep. In terms of overall filmmaking, this is pretty standard for Marvel. The effects were pretty good and the fight scenes were fun and engaging for the most part. The fights aren't on the same level as The Raid or Oldboy, but they still get the job done. I especially like the extreme blood that was used in the movie. I'm a big fan of action movies having ridiculous levels of bloody violence, and the fight scenes here really scratch that itch for me. In terms of direction and cinematography, everything is pretty generic. In fact, some shots do look kind of ugly in my opinion, but there is some fun camera work done during the fight scene with all the multiverse versions of Deadpool. I'd say overall this movie is definitely worth checking out. It's extremely fun, and while it is very flawed, it delivers on its self-aware humor, cast chemistry, and hyper-violent action.